I'm going to talk this morning about blessings and what a tremendous blessing it is for Laura and me to be back here. This indeed feels like home. Driving over here this morning, Laura and I both commented, we just don't have any bad memories of our time in Fort Smith. And that theme of Mayor Ray Baker, that life is worth living in Fort Smith, Arkansas, still seems to be alive and well today. So what a joy it is to be back among you. I thank you for your wonderful hospitality that we have already received, and I'm glad to be with you in this beautiful space to worship again this morning. So before we go to the scriptures, let us join together in a moment of prayer. Gracious God, as we come to hear your word, we are bold enough to ask for your blessing. We know that your word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. So silence within us any voice but your own, and free us from distracting thoughts, so that we may hear with joy what you would say to us this day. We make our prayer in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. First scripture lesson this morning is found in the letter to the Romans. We're in the 5th chapter, beginning in the first verse. Therefore, since we are justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have obtained access to this grace in which we stand. And we boast in our hope of sharing the glory of God. And not only that, but we also boast in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not disappoint us, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit that has been given to us. Then we turn to the book of Genesis in the 32nd chapter. Hear this morning about the story of Jacob and his wrestling match the night before he was to meet with his older brother Esau. So hear God's word in the 32nd chapter as we begin in the 22nd verse. That same night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok River. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Penuel, limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the thigh muscle that is on the hip socket, because he struck Jacob on the hip socket at the thigh muscle. The reading ends at the end of the 32nd chapter. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God will stand forever. We're going to talk about dreams for a little bit this morning too. And I told the 9 o'clock group that I feel very comfortable with all of you and going to confess some things this morning that I have the most strange and bizarre dreams at night that I think a person can have. Sometimes it wakes me up and I can't get back to sleep because I'm just trying to figure out why in the world would I dream this particular dream. And part of my life I've been worried about this because perhaps a college psychology course introduced me to the works of Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung, who concluded that dreams provided insight into the inner workings of the mind. And I'm just thinking, gosh, is my mind that twisted to dream some of the things that I do? And I was comforted by a recent article in 2018 in Psychology Today where 2 Harvard scientists had proposed that various brain circuits become very active at night. And it triggers sensations and emotions and memories, all of which are essentially random. And they propose, since we are meaning-making creatures, that our brains assemble all of this activity into a story. But they say that the story doesn't actually mean anything at all. Whew, what a sense of relief for me. I might be crazy in the inner workings of my mind, but this at least gives me some hope that maybe I'm not as crazy as I thought. But I have other dreams that I know the meaning all too well. I have recurring dreams that I almost realized this morning. First, here I had a dream when I was in Fort Smith that I was sitting in this chair and it came time for the sermon, and Leighton Mose looked across at me and said, "Go on, Stuart, you've got the sermon for this morning." And I was totally unaware that I was supposed to be preaching. And right before I get up to preach, I would wake up. When I moved to Springdale, the recurring dream was that I just couldn't make it into worship on time. My robe would be misplaced, or I couldn't get the robe buttoned up, and I just couldn't get there at 11 o'clock. And I spent so much time down in the fellowship hall, that dream nearly came true this morning. But perhaps you've had similar dreams like that related to your line of work. And I've always thought that perhaps those dreams are there to perhaps prevent that thing from actually happening. While some of my dreams have no comprehensible meaning, some of my dreams I can interpret very well, because I find that what I'm dealing with at work, what I'm worried about, what I'm fearful about, oftentimes make their way into my dreams. And I'm wondering if that was not the case with Jacob in the story that we just heard from Genesis. Mark Trotter gives an interesting perspective on this familiar story. He reminds us that this was a story coming from the ancient world. This was a time period when people did not make the distinction between the inner world of spiritual experience and the outer world of physical reality. For them, it was all the same, all blended together. Now, Trotter is one who believes that this story was a dream for Jacob. By saying that, he does not deny that this could be an encounter with God. That happens in dreams frequently in the Bible. Think back in the birth narratives in the Gospels that Joseph and Mary are visited by angels in their dreams. The ancient Jews knew when they told the story of what happened at the Jabbok River that Jacob prayed to God and asked for God's blessing in his life. Which in order to do that, The proud Jacob had to confess of his sins. He had to acknowledge his dependence upon God. The Jacob we've seen up until this point in the story of Genesis did not seem like one who was willing to do that. This rebel, this independent, this self-sufficient, successful entrepreneur who had outwitted everyone, who got whatever he wanted whenever he wanted it, has now come up against God and has come up against one who cannot be tricked, who cannot be lied to or cheated or deceived, the one to whom we all must yield. So you can imagine that for Jacob this was a struggle and prompted some inner turmoil deep in his soul. And no doubt Jacob had a big worry and fear on his mind. It had been there for years, for he is about to face his biggest fear in life, his older brother Esau. He's about to meet his brother, and he knows this situation can either make him or break him. If perhaps it's been a while since you've looked at this story, let's go back and review and remember that Jacob was the younger twin brother of Esau, the sons of Isaac and Rebekah. Remember that Jacob had tricked his father, Isaac, into giving him the blessing and the birthright, which was supposed to go to the firstborn Esau. And Esau was so angry that he had threatened and promised to kill Jacob the next time his eyes came upon him. And Mother Rebekah overheard this and helped escort Jacob out of town to live with his uncle Laban. And it's there that Jacob falls in love with Rachel. But remember, he was tricked himself into marrying the older sister Leah first. And he had to work 7 years for Leah and then another 7 years before he could marry Rachel. And at this point in the story where we read this morning, Jacob has 11 sons through 4 different women. Remember, when Rachel and Leah could not provide a child, Jacob used their servants in order to have children. So 11 sons, Benjamin's not yet born, through 4 different women. And while he's been working with Uncle Laban, Jacob has amassed a fortune in terms of livestock and servants. But now it's come time to go home and face older brother Esau. Would the many years that have passed softened his brother's heart and made him kinder toward him? Or were those years have just made him even madder and his heart more hardened against his brother? Jacob's unsure which way it's going to be, and he decides to send a peace offering up ahead, a gift of livestock and servants in order to appease his brother. And Jacob sends everyone else ahead as well. And he spends one anxious, worry-filled night alone before meeting his brother. Verse 24 of what we read says, Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with Jacob until daybreak. Jacob's holding his own in this wrestling match until the man struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint. That's not enough to make Jacob give up. And when dawn is beginning to break, the man says, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." Jacob says, "I will not let you go until you bless me." Man asks him his name, and Jacob replies, "It's Jacob." And the man says, "You will no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. You have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." The man said, "Why is it that you ask me my name?" and there he blessed Jacob, who is now Israel. And Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." And the sun rose, and Jacob passed Peniel and was limping because of his hip. Old Testament scholar Walter Brueggemann calls this passage the most extensively interpreted text in all of the patriarchal materials in Genesis. And the reason for this, according to Brueggemann, is the lack of clarity in the story, which leads people to speculate on its meaning. First is the identity of this man. He never tells Jacob his name. He's only identified as a man in the passage. The second is this something that is physically, literally happening, or is it a dream? And then Brueggemann raises the question, is the figure, the man he's wrestling with, is it perhaps Esau? Before you discount that too quickly, remember that the next day when the reconciliation with Esau goes well, Jacob says, to see you is to see the face of God. Peniel, the Hebrew word for face. Certainly one who was so worried about this encounter could be expected to dream about it the night before. It probably would make its way into my dreams if I were in his shoes. We aren't really given a clue about the identity of the man until Jacob asks for a blessing and tells the man his own name. All that we know is that this is a worthy adversary. Man seems to have an advantage over Jacob by throwing his hips out of socket. Jacob seems to have an advantage over the man because he has to ask him to please release your hold and let me go. Jacob gets his new name. You've striven with God and with humans and prevailed. And I wonder if Jacob was asking the question, striven with God, do you mean right now? Are you telling me that you are God, that I've been struggling with God tonight? Or are you talking about throughout all of my life that I've striven with you because I have, as I've questioned you and doubted you or wondered how God could be working in my life, especially when my beloved Rachel could not provide a child? Or how could you be working through one like me who treated my father and my brother so cruelly? Jacob again, tell me your name. Provide me some clarity here. The man doesn't provide a name, but does give Jacob a blessing. Jacob tells us he calls the place Peniel because he's seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved. And added to the ambiguity of all this is when we read later, when Moses is up on Mount Sinai, remember, he cannot look at God. Moses has to wear a veil, for God says, no one can see me and live. So all this ambiguity in this story. The man is never conclusively identified for us, but for Jacob it is evident to him that he has been in the presence of God. Whether God himself or a messenger of God, Jacob has come face to face with God. He has survived. He has struggled with God, and in the midst of the struggle, he has changed. He is given a new name and a new identity. Up until now, he is known as Jacob. Jacob literally means the one who supplants or the one who grabs the heel, trying to supplant his brother's place as the firstborn, which he later does through his deception. Jacob is no longer the supplanter, the trickster. Jacob is now Israel, the one who is striven with God and with humans. And that's a good representation for the Hebrew people in general. So here Jacob is, a new man with a new identity. The stage is set. Perhaps he needed this new identity before he faced his brother Esau, before he settled back in the land that will become the promised land to Jacob's descendants. Israel is the one who has faced God, been touched by God, and gained a blessing. He's changed. He now walks into his future with a limp. So this encounter will not give us a neat summary of expected roles, because if it is God, we would expect God Almighty, all-powerful, to easily dispose of Jacob in a wrestling match. Brueggemann says, perhaps there's something new and profound going on here in this text about the weakness of God and the strength of Israel. It reminds us, Brueggemann says, of Good Friday, when the expected strong Messiah goes weakly and feebly, carrying his own cross to be crucified. New possibilities are now open to Jacob that have never been available before. So before he meets his brother, things are different. He's been humbled. Perhaps he doesn't need to press his power so fully. He walks into this future with a limp, but I suggest he walks into the future with a power that he hasn't had before. At least a power that he did not allow to be at work in his life. A power that is made perfect in weakness. So, Jacob spends his restless night wrestling with God before his big moment of confrontation with his brother, and he demands a blessing. I will not let you go until you bless me. Why does Jacob demand this blessing? The text doesn't say it, but I wonder if Jacob realizes that a blessing will bring to him a fresh start, a renewed confidence that despite everything that had happened in his life, that God's promises to him were indeed going to be realized through this new man with a new name. And perhaps Jacob knows that there's a chance that now meeting his brother will result in reconciliation rather than defeat. Sure enough, when you remember the story, it's very similar to the story of the father and the prodigal son. When Esau saw his brother, he ran to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him. Esau wants to deny all of the gifts that he's given him. I don't need them, my brother. And Jacob says, please accept my gifts, for truly to see your face is like seeing the face of God. Haniel, Hebrew, the face of God. There's a lesson, I think, in this story for those of us who worry and are struggling and are facing situations where the outcome is frightening and uncertain. Many of you in this room are there now. Many of you have been there before at a time in your past. The question is, are we going to run from life and run from God when faced with these difficult situations that life throws our way? Are we going to give up and give in? Or instead, will we wrestle with God? Will we be with him in the struggle and be bold enough to ask for and demand a blessing even in the midst of a difficult situation? It can happen. It does happen. As a pastor, I've witnessed it time after time in the church. As I've sat with families and prayed with families, as I've officiated memorial services for families who have lost a loved one, extremely difficult situations, I've experienced blessings in the midst of those. And I think some of you who have been there have been able to get on the other side and experience those blessings as well. Yes, we're not the same after going through it. We're not the same when a loved one dies. We miss their presence. We walk through life differently, perhaps with a limp from that point in the future. We might have a thorn in the mind or in the soul as we worry and now face life with a difficult and different set of circumstances. But if we are faithful, and if we are attentive to God and walking with God and allowing God's presence and Spirit to be with us in the midst of that, then I think a blessing can come our way and a new identity may come our way as well. I think there's a little bit of Jacob in all of us. We look back over our lives and we realize that we have hurt people and we've perhaps deceived people and we have gained on the backs of what others have done. God understands all of that. And that grip that I think that we need to keep having a hold of God, we have to understand that God keeps that gripped on us. The words of that beautiful hymn, a love that will not let me go. That's the grip that God has on us. And I encourage each of us, no matter what we're facing in life, to keep that grip and that hold upon God and to be bold enough to ask for and demand a blessing, no matter what we are struggling with and facing in life. Let us pray. Lord, help us to seek your blessing, even in the midst of our struggles. Assure us of your presence and the power of your Holy Spirit as we navigate the stressful and difficult situations in life. Walk with us in the future as we seek to live into our identity as followers of Jesus Christ. For it's in his name that we pray. Amen.